morning, everyone. Good morning. As Kevin and Pat told you, I'm John Corrado, President of Suffolk Transportation. A couple of facts about Stony Brook. I sat on the council for 12 years at the university. Tremendous place, always doing really cool stuff. To give you an idea of the size of Stony Brook, we had budgetary problems. I guess there's always budgetary problems, but budgetary problems in the early 2000s, and the university hires a consultant to come in and make recommendations how to save money. A lot of money, by the way, that they spent on this person. So his first item was printer toner. And by changing the toner setting in the printers on the campus from high to medium, they saved over $1 million a year. It's like crazy. That just gives you the size of the organization. Now, hopefully, everything's being scanned. Another thing that connection to Kendra's presentation, Walt Disney was the first organization to set up develop a routing algorithm. So they had some pretty sophisticated stuff going on in the early 90s. Eric, who you can hear from via Eric, probably wasn't born yet. But we actually bought that software, tried to use it in school bus, do our conversion. They warned us it may not work, and it was a struggle. It was ahead of its time. Anyway, Suffolk Transportation. So, this is my grandfather. Also, John Corrado. Neat picture. Whenever I speak, I always like to give him credit for where I am today. This is 1922 in Queens. Both my grandparents came over here. They were immigrants in their teens. Found different odd jobs and ultimately ended up owning a bus each. My grandfather, this grandfather, owned two. And he brought his brother from Italy over to drive the second one. And those two gentlemen, along with about 40 other people, helped form Green Bus Line, which if your parents are from the city, you guys have lived in the city, that was the largest privately held public transportation company in the country until the MTA took them over about 15 years ago. My father, so how do we get from Queens to here? My dad went to school, started his career at Green Bus Line. It was a big organization at the time. They were doing $350 million worth of business with the city. Felt lost in a sea of people, and a friend of his that was selling buses to a gentleman out here in Bay Shore, Long Island, at Suffolk Transportation, said, why don't you meet Terry Ahern? And my dad borrowed the money from a cousin who was a doctor, and his parents, and he bought Suffolk Transportation, a 50-bus operation at the time. They had some public transit work at the time when he purchased the business, and then he grew along with the rest of Suffolk County. Here's who we are today. This is our newest facility. This is in Corm, right at the intersection of 112, and for those of us that grew up in Huntington, we call it Jericho Turnpike, but here it's called 25. 15,000 square foot facility, dispatch training, maintenance that we do out of there. This yard is already set up for electric buses. When we built it about 5 years ago, we piped it to handle the wiring, and now we're just waiting. We're going to talk about electric at the end of the presentation, waiting for the electric buses to come along. Quick history of 30 years of public transit. So I was an accountant, actually, by trade. I went to school in the Midwest, Michigan, and like many, I guess, sons of fathers that own businesses, we had our struggles. My dad and I didn't want to work for him. So I was an accountant. I became a CPA, and my grandma passes away, and my uncle, I call him an uncle, was one of the original bus drivers, said, you really got to try this business. So I came out in 1988 on a handshake with my father that he would only work for 5 years with me. Love him, he's still alive, and we get along, but true to his word, it was 5 years to the day. But 1988, the system is running about 140 vehicles, moving about 6 million passengers. It's a privately owned system. In other words, it was a franchise system. So the bus operators had the rights that the state had granted them to run on certain roads, Montauk Highway, Route 112, and what have you. No paratransit back then. Population of the county is about 1.3, maybe a little lower, and there were 8 different companies. So the companies had all done their own thing. They were all family businesses. They were all doing something else. School buses, in the case of Jitney, providing coach service, Sunrise Coach, school bus and coach service. And this was a side job for all those 8 companies, developing their own routes. So my dad came up with the idea of putting buses on Brentwood Road, and he would apply for the operating authority. He would take a school bus that he ran to move children, pull it out of the fleet over the summer, paint it white, so it looked like a transit bus, and then he would start running up and down the road, developing ridership. By the way, running only when you can make money, so during rush hours, the trains, and what have you. Sometime in the mid-1980s, before I got there, the county got involved with subsidy. So the state came through with a system where they would provide subsidy on the fare for seniors. That was the beginning of state subsidy. They call it STOA now. And the federal government had a program, which we now call 5310, where you could buy real transit buses. In order to do that, you needed a municipal sponsor. So my dad went to the county to see if he could get the county to take on the interest of Suffolk Transit. They actually weren't interested. And my dad was forced to go to, and the other operators go to their supervisor. So town of Iceland, Cohallen was our supervisor, agreed to do it. Cost them nothing, by the way. Would have cost the county nothing, but they didn't see it. So the supervisor agreed to co-sponsor us to get real transit buses and to take this fare reduction for seniors. And that has developed into a much more robust program now. About a third of our money comes from the state. But it's a very small system. Fast forward to today, and this is a little bit like what Kendra is talking about. I mean, you said, gee, 1982, nothing's changed. 1985, not much has changed. Basically the same size fleet. We had grown a little bit in the early 2000s, and then our current county executive, who's been very supportive, but had budgetary problems and cut some of the service out in 2016. So we're about the same size, moving a few less people. We do have a paratransit system, very robust, I would say, one of the larger systems in the state. Population has grown a little bit, and we're down to 3 companies. Still a privately run system. We do about half the work. There's a company in Babylon, EBT, that runs the western part of the county, and then an organization called Twin Forks, which is really Sunrise Coach and Hampton Jitney. You guys know Hampton Jitney that run the system. So we're actually very cost efficient. If you look at the federal statistics that get published every year, you'd be hard pressed to find a system that runs for less cost per mile or per hour. So we're very cost efficient. One of the ways we do that is by having this not be our main business. So we run 1,500 school buses, we run 75 transit buses, and about 180 paratransit buses. So it's a smaller piece of our operation. It's the case in all 3 companies. So we get to share overhead and administration and what have you to manage our dollars. So we're very cost efficient. However, as we get on the presentation, oops, don't go there yet. There's not a lot of density, population density. So our rides per hour, our rides per mile are very low compared to, let's say, Nassau County or Westchester. This is what the current system looks like. Covers a lot of space. So when the ADA law comes in 1990, it says that you must provide paratransit service within 3/4 of a mile of a fixed route. It subsidizes the fixed route. So you put a balloon, 3/4 mile balloon, around the fixed route system, and that's your paratransit population. If you were to do this, I couldn't find the picture real quick. If you were to put that 3/4 mile balloon around all these routes, you would find that you cover 95% of the population of Suffolk County. So the system goes everywhere, and it does a really good job of covering a lot of territory. It's a little haphazard, because as I described earlier, routes were developed on the whim. Go here, where can I pick up people, how do I get passengers on board? It wasn't really very coordinated. So this serves a lot of people, but maybe no one really well. And I'm going to talk about some of the changes coming forward. How many of you have ever seen this picture, by the way? This is a rub of mine. You have to search for this. The system doesn't do a very good job of advertising itself. Our users, about 25,000 constituents to the transit system, need to be taught on how to use the system. And there are people that do this, volunteer to do this. We do it. We go into the high schools, we teach people how to use our system. Very complicated, not easy to teach, but also probably not properly marketed. So what has changed in the last 30 years? I guess a lot. This is not meant to be a political presentation. I apologize for some of the words that may seem a little harsh. Sprawl. You know, folks came out here, my parents moved out here, they weren't looking for a bus system, right? They were looking for a garage for their car, a nice lawn possibly, and good schools. So we developed and built Suffolk County with what they call now sprawl. And that's a negative word because we now realize that we're maybe overusing our resources by doing that. But today we're doing a lot of high density downtown building. I live in Bayshore, massive projects going up. Tritex doing a 400 unit apartment building. I think there's gonna be 1,500 in total that were really built in the last 5 years. This is good for transit. By the way, if you have the lawn and the garage, maybe you're not so happy about this. We'll see how these things come together. Expansion of the malls. This is how we shop. We drive, we park, we go to the mall. Colleges, Stony Brook, 1965 to 2022, much different facility, complex, much bigger. Businesses grown here, hospitals have grown here. Aging population. This is, I guess the first two are specific to Suffolk. These other bullets are really hurting into the whole country. Right? We are an aging population, certainly here in Suffolk County as well. The internet, GPS tracking, iPhones, apps. We don't realize prior to 2007, we didn't have the iPhone. Right? I had the occasion, I'm going to tell you a quick little story, because I like to, I'm 57 now, I turned 40, and I'm out with my friends for my birthday in New York City, and we run into Bruce Springsteen. And I spent a half hour with him. He was with his wife and child. He's walking out, he says hello. We had a beer or two already at that point. And he walked by me and he says, oh, why is everyone getting together? That's on my birthday, he gave me a little hug, whatever. I said, wow, that was great. He's at a hotel right next door. He leaves his wife and child at the hotel. He comes back, puts a couple $100 on the bar, says, let's drink. I had 10 friends with me, so I have proof that this happened. But think about the lack of technology. You know, if I had my iPhone, we'd be selfies, pictures, there'd be some video of him. I would have asked him for an audio message. I did, and I threw my own birthday party, by the way. I set that up. My wife did something at the house with my parents and family, which was lovely, but not nearly as entertaining. But I said, let's call her. So we did have a phone. Someone had a phone on him, like a flip phone, and he called and left a message on my house tape machine. And I saved that. So I actually have that on my phone. I'll play it for you later. Anyway, all this technology that's here in front of us now, that's all really very new. You know, 5, 10 years is not a long time, and this is going to create some opportunities. Of course, from that, Uber, DoorDash. Who remembers like first hearing about Uber? My child was taking a tennis lesson, and he was 14. And I was with a bunch of other parents with 14-year-old kids, and we're all exhausted from driving. And this is like everywhere, we're gonna take the kids everywhere. And someone says, oh, you know, there's this new thing called Uber now. And I didn't put my 14-year-old in an Uber. This fellow did. But it was like, wow, what's Uber? What's that all about? And now we have this. That was 8 years ago, not very long ago. Amazon. Who would have thought this would have worked? Right? I watched a small documentary on this. I did have that first Kindle. You know, you read the newspaper. By the way, I didn't like it. Little thing like this, I didn't know if I was at the beginning or the end of the book. I went back to books and paper newspapers, but then they started selling stuff, and it blew up. The pandemic, terrible, worst thing to happen, certainly in my lifetime. Does any good come out of this? Maybe. Virtual school, when it's necessary. So maybe people that can't go to a building and get a proper education can now do that with some good virtual options. Hybrid work schedules. This is yet to be played out. How this is all going to work, we know it's the buzzword. Anyone that's doing HR right now, a good friend of mine does HR in New York City, this is what everyone's doing. If you don't talk hybrid, people aren't interested. I have 2 young boys, one's working in New York City now, the other's about to graduate from IU. They are looking for 5 days a week in an office. They don't want to sit in their apartment, they're not looking to drink during the workday, thank God. They like to go to work, meet some people, maybe have a beer after work, and then have their home as only their home. So we'll see how that all works out. Zoom, tremendous. Another quick story, a friend of mine who's a neighbor of my father's, Larry Schulman, 20 years ago said, I'm gonna set a camera up in your office, and I'm gonna put a camera in my house, and I'm gonna use the internet, and we're gonna actually see each other and be able to talk. So we did this, and it was cool, but I'm like, why don't you just get in your car and come meet me? Why am I talking like this? But how useful that is now, and how we've all learned to use Zoom and Teams and what have you. Electric vehicles, we'll talk about that. The electric vehicles are really a pet project for me. How do we want to live, work, and move about? So this has changed dramatically, right? Where do we work? Do we commute? Many folks moved out from the city, said, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not getting back and forth on the train. Or I'll stay with my job in the city if you only make me come in once or twice a week. Ridership has dropped. Certainly during the pandemic. Does it ever return on the Long Island Railroad to the 350,000 people it used to move? How and where do we shop? The malls, really sad in some cases. I live right by the South Shore Mall. Certainly Christmas, parking lots are full. People are not traveling like they used to the shopping center. It used to be an afternoon, not so much anymore. I can tell you from my front stoop, I don't know if my wife goes to the stores ever. There's a million boxes. We drove here today. I'm returning. Now she doesn't even tell me what to do. She puts by my car keys the box of whatever, the shoes or the shirt that didn't fit. I've tried to convince her, listen, you're struggling with this, just go to the store. Because you can try multiple shoes on like in a minute instead of weeks of back and forth with the boxes. But we can now shop from home very easily. How do we socialize? Gaming. This is a big deal, right? Now they have gaming as a sport in a lot of high schools. And it's really cool for people that didn't want to or maybe couldn't play or run on the field. But it's certainly changing how our children act and grow. Metaverse. You guys know what the metaverse is? This is like this crazy concept of avatars, and we develop a digital character of ourselves. Have you heard about this? How many people have heard about this? This is going to be a big deal. And then these characters actually do things. They interact with each other. I'm explaining to my mother, she's 83 years old, she's in Florida now. I said, Ma, there'll be a digital character. She wants to see one of her friends. I said, soon you'll see your friends digitally, and you go shopping digitally. She says, am I going to be able to spend money? I said, I think so. Digital dollars you'll be able to spend. So we're not even going to be leaving the house to have this experience. It's a social experience right from your kitchen table. How important is traffic congestion as an issue? Certainly before the pandemic, very high, very high. But if we're moving around less, maybe traffic goes down. By the way, Uber, tremendous. Anyone connected to Uber here? Tremendous invention. Going to change the way we live. Uber does not reduce traffic. It actually creates traffic. Eric, you can expand upon that later. How expensive or inexpensive are cars and electric cars? Listen, if a car was $100 and didn't burn a lot of fuel, maybe you don't need a public bus. Maybe the future is a lightweight vehicle that doesn't crash into anything, that stays on a track because it's magnetically connected to the road system. I don't even know if you need a road test. It's not going to crash into something. Maybe you could be 10 years old and operate this. Maybe it's small and it's efficient, and that's how we're going to move around. Who wants to drive and who can drive? My children don't want to drive. They really don't. Knock on wood, thank God, I feel the young people, by and large, don't drink and drive. They don't. And I'm not going to ask anyone to raise their hands, but if you're over 50, you did it. As a kid, you did it. Maybe even more than just drinking. But today, the kids don't do it, and they're not interested in cars. They're not excited about a car. I bought my daughter a car so she can get around when she was 19. And whatever. What color? I don't care. I didn't care what car it was, where it was from, how old it was, or whatever. Yeah, if it's going to get me someplace, I need it. It's a necessity. Then who can't drive? We got an aging population. My mother-in-law has macular degeneration. She's physically healthy, basically, but she can't see the road anymore. So there'll be a greater need created by that. So this is a lot to throw into a pot and figure out how we better move ourselves around. So Suffolk County, we've been advocating for this for years now. How do we change what we're doing? We've got these buses that run up and down streets. By the way, our bus system up until 1995 was a wave down system. So no bus, not even a steel pole on the ground. You just stood there and went like this, and the bus would pull over for you. And then you hit the button when you wanted the bus to stop, and the bus driver would try to find a place. Then they planted steel poles, but there was no shelter program, so now you stand next to a pole without proper cover, maybe a little bit close to the road. Could be dangerous. At night, it's not lit. Again, dangerous. So how do we make this better? People are not looking to use our system. Cost to run a transit bus. It's the most expensive vehicle on the road. And these are $800,000–900,000 pieces of equipment. If they're not full, this is not good use of public resources. By the way, you say to yourself, why didn't you buy smaller ones? And the county now runs the system. I might have skipped that. Somewhere in the early 90s, the county took over the system, no more franchises. So we work as a vendor of Suffolk County. We get paid on a per mile basis. They took some of the route development rights away from us, which was okay. We thought they were going to do it. 30 years later, not much was done. But they do see now the need. And so we didn't get smaller vehicles because they don't make them. Transit buses, there's 50,000 transit buses in the United States. It's not, there's millions of cars, right? There's 500,000 school buses. It's a very small population. They're all handmade, they're like boats. Not so sure if there's even more boats than transit buses. So they don't offer this wide array. There's a couple of companies that make them. They go bankrupt every 2, 3, 4 years. They come under a new name and what have you. So it's a challenge to find the right size transit bus. So we have this vast network of routes you saw before that are running all over the place. And maybe as part of a new opportunity, we're going to not run on every road. We're going to only run on the roads that need to be run on, where we can build up a passenger base and move more people. So a system in the future that, you've read about this now, this is going to happen, cut the routes in half, but run them more frequently. So a system that maybe serves not everyone poorly, but less people efficiently. Move from a 1-hour interval to a 30-minute interval. Take this big diesel bus. This is my personal mission, right? We moved out here. We rarely fill the bus. We do in some instances, but we rarely fill the bus. These roads were not built for a big transit bus. The transit bus was not built to travel on suburban roads. It's got a great brake system. It weighs 60,000 pounds. It takes about 75 feet to stop this thing at 40 miles an hour. So you get in front of us, it's a bad situation. Not every road is even built for the transit bus. So we're on Brentwood Road, we're on 5th Avenue. Sometimes these roads, it's awkward to have this size vehicle. And I'm hoping they'll be smaller, hybrid, and of course, electric. Bus stop poles that get converted into clean, safe, lit, heated bus shelters, right? So we have, I can't remember that, I think it's 13,000 steel poles. Those need to be reduced. And then the ones that are left need to be enhanced so that they're safe, clean, and dry. Walking last mile. By the way, very few solutions 10 years ago. Vaya's going to talk about some solutions, microtransit, which includes everything from scooters, bikes, smaller vehicles. Very structured routes as we have now, to routes that are more flexible, virtual bus stops that won't take Eric's thunder away, but this is some really cool stuff that's all app driven. Wave the bus down. I mentioned this before. Now apps and algorithms are going to match the rider where they want to go to what needs to be done and our resources. So this is I've only got a couple pages. This is a 60-page document. The county spent a lot of money. Smart fellow, consultant, Jarrett Walker put this together. He did this for Suffolk County. This is happening all throughout the United States. I have it on my table here, a copy of an article in this month's Mass Transit magazine. Who gets Mass Transit magazine yet? I knew it. You don't need to subscribe. I'll send you the article. I'll send it to Kevin, and he could share it with you guys. But Rochester, upstate New York, has developed a new reimagined program that's very much like this. So these folks came in. They did a lot of work. Took them years to do this. And you can't read this obviously, but the picture on the right is a system, not necessarily our system, but a system serving lots of people, lots of areas, but not very well, to something that's a little more organized, easier to understand. And how do I get it from point A to B? In the left picture, that's a no-brainer. And by the way, if it's coming every 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour, you're willing to wait. As opposed to how do I get a point A to B on the right-hand side? I'm standing there an hour possibly, and I missed the bus, it could be even longer. The heat map, Suffolk County, we've seen some of this before. These guys enhanced it. Where people live, where there's density, this is not a surprise. We have something called Upton in the middle of Suffolk County, so you see where it kind of ends. Point here. So from here to here is very nice trees. It's where our water comes from. It's an aquifer. There's folks that live along the shoreline, but no one's really living in the middle. And then we have a lot of density here. So it's really like two counties. You know, you got the west side and the east side of Suffolk County. Of course, the density is in Babylon, Islip, and Huntington. This is where our jobs are. Route 110 corridor, the Hop Industrial Park. By the way, I think it's still the second largest industrial park in the country. Central Islip. Then you've got here places like Stony Brook where there's a lot of employment. Brookhaven National Lab. This is our current system. The dark lines are the half-hour intervals. Very few of those. And the light lines are buses running on an hour. So here's the problem. The first picture up in the upper left-hand or the middle of the screen here, the three pictures are houses along the top. This is where people live. And then where are they going? Activity centers, schools, work. That's on the bottom. So how do you connect those dots? You can do it one of two ways. The picture on the left is how we're currently doing it. Lots of options, confusing, or bring people to a hub. Let them transfer if the service is frequent enough, and then they can go from there. Much more efficient, easy to understand, easy to use. By the way, they statistically, scientifically prove it's less. It's a 50-minute trip on the left, and it's a half-hour trip on the right. So it's a shorter trip, but you may have to get off the bus and get onto another bus. This kind of goes along with everything else that we've showed. This is where people are using our bus system. So, like I said before, workplaces. So it's darker where people live. It's darker where people go. So downtown centers, churches, hospitals, shopping malls. Smith Haven Mall. It's our greatest destination. So I had to throw this in because this is now my little pet project. What's going to go on with the vehicle and itself. This is I just found this off the internet. This is an electric bus, actually is running. They're all being made one-off. And you can see it's in a space that's dedicated to itself, right? You're all hearing about driverless vehicles. This is going to be a while. Driving, they say, is the most sophisticated human brain activity ever. And we're all hearing about these different attempts to take the driver out of the vehicle. I would say that that's not going to happen until you have dedicated space, and that humans and children and folks can't walk in the way of something. That's a long way off. But maybe there's going to be opportunities to have dedicated space. We've been on trams. The Atlanta airport, you get on a tram that takes you from one terminal to the next. There's no one driving it. Someone's watching it, but no one's driving it. Small vehicles, lightweight, electric. I had to put this in here because this is my hope. We don't have one of these. This is what a bus shelter should look like. If you're living in Suffolk County, and if you don't use this system, you're driven by one of our shelters, you would say, what is this? In some places, people, sadly homeless people, have turned them into homes, actually sleeping in them. The all-electric school bus. I say school bus because parents want this. We want it. I think there's going to be a big push. And the school bus fleet is bigger than the transit fleet in this country, so I think this is actually going to be where you see it first. It's set up perfectly because we run 2-3 hours in the morning. We can charge midday if we have to, 2-3 hours in the afternoon. We're doing relatively low mileage. a school bus does 10, 15,000 miles a year. A transit bus does, out here in Suffolk County, 60,000 miles a year. New York City is a whole different animal. It's a different day. You guys are New York City members? I think it must be a big organization in New York City. So back to Stony Brook, we built our first hybrid about 15 years ago with the Advanced Technology Center at Stony Brook, which is really kind of a neat thing. So this is the undercarriage of an all-electric bus. That's the electric motor. I would say that two of us could probably lift one of those. 1,200 parts in the electric bus, 1,200 parts, 1,200 moving parts in a combustion engine, 120 parts in an electric motor. Much simpler. These will run forever. They say the body will rot before the electric motor gives in. They're not even that expensive, the electric motor. The complication here is the battery. So we have 4, we have 7 more coming in. And the problem has been temperature. So this lithium-ion cobalt battery, which costs $150,000, right? So a diesel bus is $100,000. This battery is $150,000. The bus is $350,000. So cost is way out of whack. But the complexity is this battery, how we charge it, and how it gets used. It has to be kept at 70 degrees. So under the hood where the engine used to live is a temperature management system that runs cold water through the battery when it's hot outside and hot water when it's cold. It's a fuss. It's a real fuss. So we get these buses, we're all excited. We know the electric bus is gonna work. We built some hybrids. I'll switch to this. We call them post-transmission hybrids. Buses that had engines, and the DOT allowed us to put the electric motor behind the transmission. Without being the manufacturer, we did it. We need Suffolk Transportation in our garage in Bayshore. We built a couple of these. They worked beautifully. The problem again was battery. So these batteries, when it's cold, get degraded. When it's hot, get degraded. The first 4 buses, we realized we couldn't actually run under 40 degrees. They wouldn't. The 100-mile battery was only going to give us about 25, 30 miles. Then we started keeping them indoors at night, trying to keep them warm. That helped us a little bit, not much. The manufacturer realized this. They knew it was a test and an experiment. They're taking those 4 buses back. They'll be replaced with a battery that has a blanket on it. I said to the manufacturer, Bluebird, I said, can we just put a blanket? Like, no. Now you're going to start a fire. It's much more sophisticated than that. So this is the issue with the electric, but I think we're on the verge of some really good technology. Hey, we want to get out of petroleum. Now we get into a whole political conversation of what's going on around the world. I think lithium cobalt is not a great alternative because we don't have this or much of it here in this country. So we're back to buying from foreign countries and being in that compromising situation. I don't think we actually have enough of this stuff to electrify the whole world. But there's some answers in solid state, nanotechnology, back to Stony Brook. Stony Brook has the #1 battery scientist in the world. I met this lady. She looks like a battery scientist. Really very pleasant woman. They have a furnace there. You need a lot of heat. They have a furnace at Stony Brook that creates the temperature of the sun inside this furnace. We looked at it through a small hole. So really good stuff. Nanotechnology. So the capacitor can, and I'm an accountant by trade, so I'm dangerously speaking about science. Our first hybrids were built with capacitors. Capacitors can take and charge very quickly, and they release energy pretty quickly, but pretty efficiently. And not a lot of chemical, lots of metal. But to have a capacitor run a school bus, it would be the size of a house, right? So the capacitor is your flashlight on your, well, I don't know, not flashlight, your flash cube on an old style or an old 35mm camera, the flash that goes off, that's a capacitor. But we can get there. Nanotechnology, pairs of fibers you can't see, metal fibers you can't see with your eye, can store this electricity. So folks at Stony Brook and Brookhaven National Lab are actually leading the way on that, and there'll be some cool battery solutions. Being all electric, I saw one of the slides by 30, 35. The governor's talking about doing that for the school bus fleet. New York City's already committed to that. Can it be done? I don't know. Right now, we've applied 3 years in a row for 10 buses, so 30 buses, and we will have 11 because they're just not available. So Bluebird made 50 for the whole country last year. Not last year, the year before the pandemic. They shut down for the pandemic. If it can happen, great. I worry a little bit. We're going to go out and buy all these, billions of dollars worth of these lithium-ion batteries, and then hopefully our battery lady in Stony Brook says, wait, we don't need all this. And now it's not $100,000, it's $10,000. They can be retrofitted, but that would be a big waste of time and money if we did that. So I think we got to move forward thoughtfully. That's the end of my presentation. I don't know if we have any questions in the audience. Thank you very much for paying attention. Thank God for the coffee, kept you guys awake for that half hour that I spoke. If you don't have any questions, and not that I don't want you to ask questions, but I think when you connect that, maybe one question back, when we start to hear about what VIA is going to do for us and how they're going to help change how we move, I think it'll put the two pieces together. The old system, I wanted to set Eric up, and then what's available and how we're going to connect these dots better. Going back to that picture of us all coming to the center, if we don't have options, now instead of walking 1 mile, we're going to be walking 5 miles. No one's walking 5 miles. By the way, has anyone walked a mile lately? That's far. It takes time to walk a mile. So we don't want to walk anywhere, let's be honest. I took the stairs up to the 3rd floor today, but that's about it. So we need options. We need creative, app-driven options that are going to be everything from, like we talked about, electric bikes, scooters, and then cars and what have you. With that,
any questions? Raise your hand.
Oh, there was someone a question.
Repeat the question, John.
I was just kidding. I was going to ask. Bruce was really cool.
Bruce Springsteen was absolutely the coolest guy. He goes to shake my hand, and I'm like, because I'm a Bruce fan, been to a dozen of his concerts, and I'm like, wow, I'm not going to just shake your hand. So I said, you got to give me a hug. He gave me a hug. He held me, he went back and forth. Not a really tall guy, but he gave me a hug. And then he came back. He had this great advice. I said to him, so I asked him to call my wife. I know this is the most interesting part of the speech. By the way, way more interesting than what I do for a living. I asked him to call my wife. So we had 3 young children at the time, and the house is crazy. And I'm still married, love my wife, but it was like, wow, we're at wit's end. He's like, oh, you people, don't ruin it. This is a lot of fun. And I'm 15 years older than you, so I was 40, he was 55. He's like, the best is yet to come. I'm like, wow, it means a lot coming from someone like yourself, such an icon. I said, I think my wife needs to hear this. Like, get me a phone. So someone had a phone. Not even everyone had a phone. He goes on the flip phone, he calls to the house, he says, my wife's name is Jackie. Jackie, this is the boss, Bruce Springsteen, and I'm here with the boys, we're all enjoying ourselves. He says, I just want to say one thing, the best is yet to come. So yeah, it was tremendous. So he was a great person, and I had visions of like running into him again, but it hasn't happened. All right, who's up? Kevin, you coming back? You introduce here. Thank you very much.
Let's give a hand, STS. Guys, we can take a 5-10 minute break. We're ahead of time, so take a 5-10 minute break. Stay home.